The sprawling Santa Clarita Valley used to be covered in family farms and ranches. As the population of greater Los Angeles exploded throughout the 20th century, most of them were paved over. Most, but not all. I'm Leon Warden, and this is Legacy, Santa Clarita's Living History, brought to you by the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society and the SCV School and Business Alliance. Tonight our guest is somebody who will tell us about one of those family farms that's still going after more than 100 years. I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Blum Billet to the show. Actually, it's Blum, right?
Yes, it is.
Of the Blum Ranch out in Aliso Canyon in Acton.
Yes.
Now, when did your people first come to Acton?
Okay, my grandfather, George Blum, and my grandmother, Magdalena Greutman, came from Switzerland, and Grandpa came out to Acton in probably around 1888 or so. He was looking for 89, 90, somewhere in there, was looking for a place to farm. And the saloon keeper at the saloon in Acton loaned him a shotgun. He shot ducks off of a lake that was there at Syracuse, or where Syracuse and Soledad Canyon Road are now, and followed the river up the Aliso Canyon, and the water was running there in the summertime, and that's where he decided to homestead then.
Well, now you say he was looking for a place to farm, but wasn't George Blum a stonecutter?
Yes, he was. That was his trade when he came from Switzerland. He was an apprentice there in Switzerland for 3 years. There was a number of men that, I think it was like about 50 men that practiced cutting stone under a pear tree, and he apprenticed there and lived with the family for the 3 years. He told a humorous story. One of his jobs while staying there was to take care of the baby, and I guess sometimes he didn't want to take care of the baby, so he'd pinch it a little bit and make it cry, and then he didn't have to take care of the baby. But he had come over to the United States in 1870 and was here for a while. I believe he came to Los Angeles at the time, but then he went back to Switzerland and told of the things in the United States and the work and the opportunities. And then my grandmother was with a group of people that he kind of acted as a guide, and they came over on ship. I'm not sure just how long it took for the ship to get here at that time, but then grandmother stayed with a brother in Chicago, and Grandpa came out to Los Angeles and was working in the stone cutting trade. He went back to Chicago a year later and asked my grandmother to marry him. And I found a page in a book that a cousin had given me that was in the family all this time, and she had written that she really wasn't ready to get married, but she wanted to come to Los Angeles, so they were married the next day on her birthday, February 6th of 1889.
Now, how was it that they came to Acton in, 1891, I believe?
Well, the grandpa was working in the, cutting the stones there in Los Angeles and worked for the Bly Stone Company. And the unions were getting involved in the stone cutting, and I guess they had been involved somewhat there in Chicago, and I guess they'd strike during the summertime, and then they were supposed to work in the winter when it was too cold to work. And so I guess the unions were getting involved, and he just kind of wanted to get out of it and do some farming and keep bees. And that's how he rode the train out to Acton then and got off there.
So they came out to Acton, ended up in Aliso Canyon, which is kind of I guess it's the eastern part of Acton, right?
Yes.
What's that area like? There's a stream running through there?
Yes, it's the upper Santa Clara River, which comes on down here through Santa Clarita and goes on out to the ocean at Oxnard. He was able to divert a little bit of the water out of there, but then after he had homesteaded and they had some orchard planted, originally he had a well, a hand-dug well, and they had a windmill on it. And then he got water rights in the canyon there in Aliso Creek and also Gleason Creek, which forms the Santa Clara River then. And they dug trenches across the river, built cement walls for an underground dam, brought the water to the surface, made miles of concrete pipe with an old cement mixer that we still have, and the pipe forms.
Really?
And laid all the pipes to come down and to be able to irrigate the trees that they had planted.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, in a lot of the lower land on the property, they had grape vineyards, alfalfa fields, grain that they fed to the cows and horses, and they just diverted some water out of the river right there on the property and irrigated that. But later then they were able to irrigate the trees just with the gravity flow from the pipeline.
Didn't your grandfather, though, start out in the beekeeping business?
Yes, originally he had bees, and they made a lot of the comb honey. They had the comb honey supers that they would put on the bees and make little square sections of comb honey that were about 5 inches square.
Mm-hmm.
And there were several families around the Mellons and some of the others in the area that had bees, and then the honey buyer would come out from Los Angeles, make deals with the men, and then they'd send a railroad car out and they'd all take their honey down to the depot there in Acton. There was a little freight depot there, and load it on the car. And that's the way originally that they got some of the money to start planting the trees. And of course he would ride the train back to Los Angeles and work in the stone cutting trade. Mm-hmm. To make more money to be able to do more things there on the ranch.
Okay.
He had a brother named Mike that stayed out there quite a bit of the time, because part of the homestead process was that you had to live on the land and work the land for 10 years before you were granted the deed to it. Mm-hmm. And so then later, as my dad George and his brother Bill were about 11, 12, 13 years old, they would leave them out there during the week to let the cows loose, milk the cows, bring the cows home at night, get themselves, walk over to school in Acton, and come home and bring the cows in and milk them again and do the other chores. And so that was quite a project for, if you think of 11 and 12-year-olds today. But of course, they were good, strong workers, and Dad often told that his dad would leave them a list of work to get done, and they would try to get it all done and maybe a little bit more to get some praise, and then the dad would say, mm-hmm. Well, if you could do that much this week, we'll give you a little more next week.
Now, your father was who?
My father was George John Blum.
Okay. How many children did George Blum, the grandfather, have?
There were the two boys, George, that was born in November of '89. Mm-hmm. William, or everybody called him Bill, mm-hmm. was born the following December in 1990, and then there were 4 girls, Frida, Alma, Emma, and Bertha. Now, Frida and Alma were born in Los Angeles, as were my dad George and Bill, but the mm-hmm. 2 younger girls were born out there on the ranch. Grandpa just rough cut stone, put it together with mud, and built a 2-room house that they called the homestead house. It had dirt floors, and that's where they all lived until they built the big house that we live in today.
Now, was that original house, that was the one that he built like in 1891 when he first arrived?
Well, I assume that it took him a little while. I know they had a tent. He might have stayed in a tent part of the time until he got this house mm-hmm. built. Of course.
Does that house still stand? That original
yes,
homestead
the house is still there. They later took the roof off, added another room, cement walls for foundation, and then later built a frame house on top of that. Okay. Because by that time, in the early 30s, Grandpa had arthritis so bad he couldn't get up and down the stairs in the big house, mm-hmm. and my dad and uncle would have to carry him if they took him upstairs or anything, and so Grandma and Grandpa were going to live in that frame house. But then Grandpa passed away in July of 1932, and so then my family ended up living in that.
But your grandfather did build the house that you live in now.
Yes, they started it around 1912. Mm-hmm. Of course, had to hand dig a basement that is about 15 by 30 feet. That's half as large as the house, and it is all cut stone blocks that he put up with cement. And then before they had the rest of the house on, why they had some heavy rains in the summertime, a thunderstorm, and it filled the basement with mud and dirt, so then they had to dig that out. By 1914 or 15, then they had all of the walls up, which are cut stone up about 5 feet, and then just the cobblestone, the river rocks on the rest of it. Big cut stone blocks over the windows, the doors. There's one piece that's 9 foot long on the one side of the house. And of course, all of these, they you don't just lift a block of cement that's 3 foot long by a foot square up onto a top of a window, and so they had to use planks and make kind of like cranes and use a block and tackle and so on to get that up there. Then in 1915, they had enough money from the comb honey crop to hire a rough carpenter and a finish carpenter to do the upstairs part of the house, which is 4 bedrooms and 2 porches. And my father said that the rough carpenter, as soon as he got there, he started cutting the rafters, and they figured they weren't gonna fit, but they all fit. And the finish carpenter did beautiful work on mitering corners and doing some carving on the buffet that is built in, and whatever they finished the wood with is still good today. We never have refinished it.
What are some of the other buildings from the old days that are still there? Is what
well,
about the beekeeping house or something?
The original beekeeping house, no, is not there anymore. Later they built another one on a different piece of the property, on some of the property that my father homesteaded then. But there was even a pig pen that has some cut stone pieces on it, some of the scraps. The one building that's by that original homestead house was a barn. They had another, like a blacksmith shop there that was later made into a garage. They also later then built a garage by the house that we live in, but the doors and the dimensions aren't quite big enough for vehicles of today.
Right.
And you wouldn't get a pickup through those doors.
Much less
But
an
it
SUV.
was good for a Model A maybe, but we have a diary that my dad's youngest sister wrote in 1916 and 17. And in November of 1916, they had bought their first Model A. And she refers in this diary to it as I lost it. The machine. She refers to it as the machine, not the automobile or the car. It was the machine. And it took them about 10 days to finally get Mama in the machine. So evidently Grandma did not like the automobile. She would rather have had the horse and buggies. But they did, when they built the house, they also put inch cables around horizontally when they built it, so that it's one reason why it's probably withstood the earthquakes we've had as well as it has.
Now your grandfather, he was still cutting stone to help get the family farm business off the ground. One of the things he did was he worked on the LA County Courthouse, the original one,
Yes,
right?
he did. It was a red stone courthouse, a very beautiful structure from the pictures I see. Later then, after the Long Beach earthquake, they had to tear it down because of the damage to it. And then later, around 1952, Warren Dorn, I believe, was the supervisor, and they contacted my father, and he went down and helped them pick out a cornerstone for the new courthouse then that they built.
Oh, really? The current one?
And yes.
Huh. Now, your grandfather also did some work out in Santa Barbara, like around the time of the earthquake of 25?
Well, he did some then, but I think he had also done some earlier, building some of the schools and the churches there in Santa Barbara also, because he did commute mostly by train into Los Angeles did quite a bit of work trying to supplement the farming until the farming could produce enough to support the family.
Now, you came along in the mid-30s. Your grandfather was already gone by the time you were born, right?
Yes,
You were born where, on the ranch? Where were you born?
in Burbank.
In Burbank?
Yes.
But
My mother was from Los Angeles, and she was seeing a doctor that was in Burbank, and I was born in Burbank. And at that time, the women stayed in the hospital about a week, so the rest of the time I lived there in Acton, except for 4 months after we were married. I lived in Palmdale, and the rest of my life I've lived there in Acton.
So you were there in Acton during the flood of 1938.
Yes. Yes.
Have any memories at all? You would have been like, what, not yet 3?
Yes, I can vividly remember we had a cupboard on a porch that was screened in, and my mother sat me on that cupboard and listening to the noise, the water, so much water that went through the canyon and all of the big boulders and rocks clanking together. It was very, very noisy. She was busy taking clothes and photos and various things from the house over to a cellar that was dug into the wall, the hillside there. And the water was at least a foot high at the lower part of the house there on the old homestead house. And so it was a pretty scary time for the whole family.
And I guess the beekeeping, the bees washed down the river, or what
No,
happened to
I
the
think
farm?
The bees were up high enough ground that it didn't wash out any bees, but it did wash out at least 2 of the old one-lunger engines, we call them, that ran the pumps.
Right.
That it washed those out, and some other equipment that was down on some of that lower land, because they did farm that at that time with the vineyards and alfalfa and the grain. And so it did some damage there and washed out quite a bit of the dirt in the canyon to the larger riverbed that it still is today.
How many people lived in the area, at that time? How many families were there in the area in the late 30s?
Well, that's a good question. There was, when I graduated from 8th grade in Acton in 1949, there was 11 of us that graduated. So
Okay.
Just how many families, I don't know if I could even hazard a good guess to it. There was probably, at that time, though, in the mid-40s, Acton and the Aguadulce School District unified to
Right.
become the Acton Aguadulce, or Soledad Aguadulce School District. And at that time, there was only 3 classes there at the school. And then they built another building that had 2 or 3 classrooms in it, but that wasn't up and running yet when I graduated.
Well, when you went to the Acton, what was it called, Acton School, which is still part of the current Acton Elementary School,
Yes.
right? When you went there, how many classrooms were there?
Originally there was 2 and an auditorium that had a stage where we'd put on plays and various functions, and that was also the gathering room for community activities, dances and so on, potluck suppers and things there in the community. And then they did put a classroom there in the auditorium because there was enough children then for 3 teachers. And of course there was always one of the teachers that was the principal. And but that was the community gathering point.
Right. Now, growing up on the farm, I guess you would have been exposed to how the fruit was brought to market. Where did you take it?
Well, they had trucks that we'd pack it into lug boxes, they were called, that would hold around 22 pounds or so of fruit in wooden boxes. And then it was hauled into Los Angeles. There's a a story that Merle Adams, that wrote a history book on Acton there, writes about in her book. And she and my two aunts, Emma and Bertha, talked their mother into letting them ride in the old truck down to Los Angeles. The truck had no doors. This was in 1928. No doors on it, so two of them sat in the seat and one had to sit on the floorboard and have their feet on the running boards. And they went down to the market and then took a streetcar, I assume, out to Highland Park, where an older sister lived with her husband, and they spent the night and then came back out on the truck the next day. So
rode all that way to and from L.A.
Yes,
That would have been a bumpy ride.
In dresses, of course. So women didn't wear slacks at that time.
There wasn't any electricity out there at the time, though.
No, not electricity. They did have a generator there on the ranch. If you wanted to iron with an electric iron rather than heating an iron on the wood cook stove, you had to start the generator. Right. The Edison Company brought power in the around 1945, I believe it was. And then we were able to have a freezer and freeze vegetables and meats and so on, where before that everything had to be canned that you wanted to keep.
Is that right? What kind of memories do you have about the war years? Anything stand out in your mind?
I remember having to pull the blinds on some nights when there was air raids, listening to the radio. Of course, we didn't have television. And the stamps, I forget what they called them now, but you had stamps for sugar and gasoline and so on. Now, on the ranch, some of it was not rationed as much because they assumed that farmers had to have more gasoline and so on than some of the others. My mother made butter. We sold butter and eggs and so on. We had our own cows, milk cows and chickens. I had cousins that were in the military.
Right.
My mother had two brothers that served in World War I. Another brother enlisted in World War II. Now, he didn't have any wounds out of World War I, but in World War II, he had enlisted and was on his way to San Diego. There'd been an accident, and he and his friend got out to direct traffic, and a car didn't stop and killed him.
Really?
So that was a sad time.
But then happier times came after the war, and you were the first, what? Miss Acton
in 1952.
52.
Yes, there were three of us that were running, and they had our pictures in the Acton market. People voted by putting a dime in the can, and I was the lucky winner. At that time, the whole purpose of being a miss in a community was to compete for Miss Antelope Valley at the Antelope Valley Fair, which at that time was just 4 or 5 days, not 2 weeks or 10 days time like it is now. And there wasn't the big pageants like there are now for the Miss Acton. I got a sash that said Miss Acton, and then I didn't make the Miss Antelope Valley, but I was able to attend the fair and the functions at the fair and so on, and I still have the dress that I wore. I can't get into it, but I still have the dress and the sash. And then this year at the Miss Acton pageant, they gave me the royal treatment with a new sash and a crown and a scepter.
50th anniversary,
yes, and they treated me real well, and fond memories of that, and then wanted me to ride in a convertible in front of the current Miss Actons in our 4th of July parade there in Acton. So it was a fun year for that.
Now, it wasn't too long after you won that award that you landed yourself a husband. How'd you do that? Who is he? Tell me how that happened.
Well, Ray Billet, who is related to the Godey family that is also a pioneer family in Antelope Valley. We met in high school. At that time, the only high school was the Antelope Valley High School there at Division Street and Lancaster Boulevard there in Lancaster. We all rode buses. He lived in Leona Valley at the time, and we met in high school. Started going steady as juniors, and then we graduated in June of '53, and we were married in August of 1953.
And you ended up taking over the family ranch. We've just got a minute or so left here to go, so why don't you tell me what the ranch is like today?
Well, today we have, originally they had 20 acres of fruit trees, apples, and pears. We pulled most of the apple trees out in '58. We've planted a lot more peach trees. We've planted an additional probably 40 acres of peaches, some of them in Blum's Beauty peaches that Ray developed. We have harvest time of 2 months instead of 2 weeks like we did years ago. We also have 4 acres of lilacs, sell the cut flowers, which is usually early April. And some years have been better than others. We've had some tough luck the last 4 or 5 years with the most of the peaches freezing in March when they're blooming in small fruit. And so we're hoping for better times.
Still produce honey?
Some, not as much as we used to, but we do get some from friends of ours and sell that also. And we sell that all year. And
tell me how to get to your ranch.
Okay. From the 14 freeway, you get off on Santiago Road and then turn right on Santiago, right on Soledad, left on Aliso, and we're a mile and a half in the canyon.
And then there's a
mile
sign.
and a half in the canyon, yes. We have 3,500 people on our mailing list for fruit and around 2,500 on the list for lilac. So we have a lot of people that have been loyal to us and come to visit us every year.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us. And for all your answers to your history questions, visit scvhistory.com on the internet or stop by the Saugus train station in downtown Newhall weekends 1 to 4. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Legacy, Santa Clarita's Living History. I'm Leon Warden. Good night.